Hey, well, isn't this interesting? Monique Davis, state rep from the South Side.
Yeah, she's gone, right?
She has resigned, ending a 30-year career as a state legislator. In her retirement letter, she praised House Speaker Mike Madigan for his ethical leadership. That's not a joke. She did. And you remember Monique Davis. She's one of those legislators, those Illinois politicians that have been such great stewards of our state and our resources, fought tirelessly for more funding for Chicago public schools while renting a building that was owned by the Chicago public school system to which she was in arrears to the tune of $600,000. That's Illinois. And that's Chicago, which is interesting because we have a Chicago alderman, admittedly a recently minted Chicago alderman, but a Chicago alderman nonetheless, named Ameya Pawar, who is the 47th Ward alderman.
He's my alderman.
He is
Yep.
clearing the way so that you can realize your dream of being a Chicago alderman
Right, Alderman Amy, yes. That's
by
right.
announcing that he is running for the Democrat nomination for governor in 2018. And Alderman Pawar joins us now. Alderman, thanks for being with us. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
So the genesis of your decision to try and level up from Chicago alderman to governor of Illinois.
I mean, I think, if you've been watching what happened with the national election, where you're dividing rural areas against urban areas, one group against the other, that's sort of been playing out in Illinois over the last couple of years, and I think that has a corrosive impact on public discourse, but society at large. And so I think we have a state that's in serious crisis right now. Universities are on the verge of closing. Our social safety net, what's left of it, is on the verge of collapse. And, it's immoral to let these things happen for an agenda that's based something on gutting unions or term limits.
Well, you kept saying we need a progressive in Springfield, and how would you get us out of our colossal state budget deficit that we're in?
I mean, let's remember that, like Chicago, one of the problems in politics on both sides of the aisle is that no one has ever been willing to level with constituents and say, these are the services you were expecting, these are the services you were demanding, and this is the cost to provide those services. There's been this drumbeat over the last 30 years where you're trying to constantly do more with less, and eventually you do less with less. And that's how you end up with privatization and people being angry all the time about what they're getting in exchange for their tax dollars, rather than people just saying, you know what, we need to raise revenue incrementally, and we have to do it fairly so that we're not putting the burden on the working poor all the way up to the upper middle class, but the rich should pay their fair share as well.
So here's the data to the assertion that we're asked to do more with less. In the last 33 years, state per capita tax revenues have grown 70% faster than inflation. So in other words, Illinois has collected $265 billion more than it would have if per capita tax revenues had only grown at the rate of inflation since 93. And I'm not saying that anybody's interested in spending at just the rate of inflation, because that's clearly not the case. And also, since 2001, we haven't had a constitutionally balanced state budget. Now, so 2001 to 2016, that's 15 years, 3 of which we've had Republican governors, 15 of which we've had House Speaker Mike Madigan, the majority of which we've had Senate President John Cullerton. So the problem in Illinois is trying to do more with less, or is it just rapacious spending to prop up systems that are structurally unfinanceable in their current form and use social welfare programs as patronage funds rather than for what they were intended to do, which is to provide assistance to those who through no fault of their own need it on a permanent basis, or temporary assistance to those that have had a soft patch on their road of life, as it were.
I mean, I think your argument would make sense if you hadn't seen a 30, 40-year decline in manufacturing as a result of globalization. So this isn't just an urban problem, because I think that's usually the argument that one would make from a conservative perspective if we're talking about urban areas. I mean, this is an urban and rural area issue. So we've seen poverty increase not just in urban America, but in rural America and all over the state, and this is a national issue.
But there's something going on in Illinois that's not going on in our Midwest neighbors. So, for example,
but if you took,
let's talk about manufacturing. Let's talk about manufacturing. Since the depth of the Great Recession, excuse me, Illinois has created 20,000 manufacturing jobs. Michigan, 170,000. We've created a fraction of the manufacturing jobs since the depth of the Great Recession that all of our Midwestern Great Lakes neighbors have. Why?
I think there's a number of reasons why, but I think the idea that somehow we pay people too much, therefore we don't create enough jobs, to me, is an odd argument. Given
then tell me why it is. Don't tell me why it's not. Tell me why it is.
I think that I can't tell you exactly why some places go, why manufacturing goes to other places. I can tell you that if you look at Chicago and you look at Illinois over the long term, we've got the right R&D, meaning we've got great universities, we've got the best transportation infrastructure, and jobs will come back here. They will. And the other thing you have to remember is we have water, fresh water in Chicago with the Great Lakes. And
so we have,
things are good.
Right, we have all
we
of
have to offer tax incentives.
we have all of this infrastructure. We have all these transportation ways. We're the transportation hub of the Midwest. And despite all of those intrinsic advantages, we find ourselves with an unemployment rate 20% higher than the national average and the redheaded stepkid in the Great Lakes region.
Yeah, but you know what you're missing, though? What? Is of all the states in the Union, we are the fourth largest economy, and we spend dead last on public education.
Yeah,
the basic building block of every community is a public school. And so when you have a situation where Gwinnett and Wilmette can spend way more in places in every other part of the state because the state won't do their part in funding public education, that's how you get with massive inequity. So if you're talking about lifting all boats, whether it's in Rockford or Cairo or in Chicago, public education is a way to do that.
Yeah, but I agree with that principally. But your statement is disingenuous because you're talking just about the state support for K through 12 education. When you include all revenue streams for K through 12 education in Illinois, we're nowhere near the bottom. We're right in, frankly, the upper quintile. That's not. But
that's in the aggregate.
That
doesn't make any sense.
What are you talking about? Resources are resources. Money's fungible. I'm not suggesting the way we fund K through 12 education is the best way to do it because I don't think it is. But the idea that $1 from my property taxes versus $1 from the state via income taxes or some other revenue stream or $1 from the federal government in grants, it's still $1, and it still adds up to, for example, Chicago, since you're a Chicago alderman, spending $15.5 per kid, which is 40% more than the high school district in Wheaton, where I grew up, spends per pupil to get far inferior results. So there's something going on that is deeper than money because we have increased spending in real terms on K through 12 education for the past 20 years, substantially, by a factor of 3. And what do we have in terms of results?
Well, you're going back to the same old tired argument, which is let's blame teachers or let's blame the unions.
What did I say? I didn't mention teachers. I didn't mention teachers. I didn't mention unions. I said, here are the inputs into the system. They have been increasing. The inputs into the worst systems have been increasing compared to better school systems, and they're not moving the needle whatsoever. And you're suggesting that more money is the so what is the money? Give me the threshold and give me how K through 12 education should look, because right now from the state, Chicago CPS represents 19% of the kids total in K through 12 education in Illinois. 19%. They get 25% of the state aid. So it's not even a proportional thing. So Chicago, $5,100 per kid from the state. Every other district, $3,400 per state.
You're pitting Chicago against the rest of the state. Chicago is also a donor. If you're talking about in terms of where dollars come from, it's also a donor in terms of the state, in terms of how much it gets back in the aggregate.
So how should schools be funded, and at what funding level? What's the magic number that's going to make all of these inequities that you suggest disappear?
If you're talking about true equity, then you're also spending more in areas where there are larger socioeconomic issues like poverty. So when you have school districts that have 80-90% poverty rates, you have to spend more in those communities. And that's not just Chicago. That's most communities outside of the city of Chicago. You know, if you go to the suburban rings outside of Chicago, yeah, you're going to see great results. But the socioeconomics of those communities are different in most of the state. So I think what we're missing here is, yes, if you add up how much money spent in the aggregate, federal sources, yes, you can say you're in the middle. But how we spend individually in districts, whether they are in small communities or in large cities like Chicago, there is a definite mismatch. And that's how you end up in a place where you have structural unemployment, that as the economy changes, you have people that are left behind. And so that needs to be addressed. And so if we're not investing in communities, and I'm not just talking about Chicago, if we're not investing in small towns, in communities around the state where manufacturing has left, and we haven't then propped up communities with investment in public education so that there is a ladder out or a ladder to another job.
What does that look like?
In the new economy.
Investment in public education. Be specific. It's a bromide. How much? What form?
With what? We're broke. I mean,
but how much and what form?
But Ameya Pawar, one of your top platforms was a millionaire's tax. Do you still believe in that, and would that help fund education?
Well, I mean, it depends on what you actually want to use the money for. So there's a few things. If you're talking about valuing families, then we actually have to look at from birth all the way through high school and beyond. And so part of that means things like universal daycare. We had a daycare subsidy program for folks making $30,000 and under, right? Because the logic is you want to send people back to work and you want to make sure that they have an opportunity to work, and we're supporting them in that. The governor cut those subsidies by 90%. So now if you make more than $10,000 a year on these a year, which is $5 an hour, you don't qualify for subsidies. So people who are now originally able to go to work and send their child to child care now cannot, now are somehow off the system, or either not working and not in the economy, or relying on some informal way of child care. So you have to look at this from the whole spectrum, which is if you want to help families, you have to help families in a way so that you're helping them in public schools, but also thinking about child care as a whole. And all we do over and over again when these issues come up is look to say, well, these people don't deserve anything, or these people aren't working hard enough, or these people somehow have failed. And
make the math work for me then. $11 billion in unpaid bills, $250 billion in total debt. We now pay $1 of every $4 that is taken out in public sector pension benefits. So make the math work for me. How do you make those systems financeable in their current form, and then on top of it, layer in the investments, quote unquote, that you want to make in communities and schools and so forth?
I think you start with, there are places where you can save money. Like, for example, with criminal justice reform. We send poor people to jail, again, in big towns, big cities, and in small towns for low-level drug offenses without providing them the accurate, proper services like diversion programs or substance abuse or mental health treatment. So we have our jails that are piled up with people who are simply poor for having a substance abuse issue or selling narcotics.
Alderman, 90% of state funding is in 3 areas: K through 12 education, Medicaid, pensions, and a 4th area would be transportation infrastructure. You are not going to dig yourself out of the hole that I just described with criminal justice reform. So let's get real.
That's not what I'm suggesting. What I'm suggesting is you have to look at the whole picture. You're looking at it simply from a balance sheet perspective. I'm looking at it from a human perspective.
Oh, gosh.
Okay. Well, if you don't want to hear it, then I mean.
No. I mean, you're interested in human beings, and I'm interested in numbers, right? That's a straw dog argument. You have got to make the math work. So explain to me how you make the math work.
So if you had a progressive, if you had the same tax code that Wisconsin has, which is Scott Walker country, you'd have $7 billion more in revenue annually. So there's the math. So if we love Scott Walker, why don't we adopt his tax code?
Yes. Yes. Well, we did that briefly in the last term of Pat Quinn.
No.
Didn't we?
That was not the same thing. They have a progressive tax code if you make more, and I'm not talking about the upper middle class. See, that's the thing that people forget. The upper middle class, all the way down to the working poor, are the exact same bill. And the thing that I always find frustrating is that people in the upper middle class and the middle class somehow identify more with people like Bruce Rauner, who don't make most of their money from going to work. If you go to work every day, you're a working person, whether you're a doctor or you work in a fast food restaurant. Now, your life is different by orders of magnitude. But if most of your money comes from investment income, like Bruce Rauner's, and a lot of his friends who are funding his campaigns, that's not a working person. And
Bruce Rauner's not a working person. Okay. Well, here's the thing about Wisconsin, since I know the left loves to use this example, so I want to break it down. The total tax burden, Wisconsin, Illinois, and you can go to Forbes and their analysis state by state on this, is about the same. It's about 12% of your income. It's about the same right now. So how they do it, the distribution, you can argue about graduated state income tax and so forth. Fine. But the total tax burden right now is about the same. So essentially the per capita revenue. And yet in Wisconsin, they have a budget surplus. And in Wisconsin, they have nearly fully funded pensions. In Illinois, we haven't had a balanced budget in 15 years, as I said. We've got $11 billion in unpaid bills now, and we have the worst unfunded pension liability in the country. So there's something going on the spend side, which is where you don't want to talk.
So you want to address pensions. The courts have ruled you have to pay. So finding a constitutional result or finding a constitutional solution is what we should be looking for. We got here in a bipartisan fashion. There's plenty of blame to go around.
Oh, I know.
Right? So that much we all can agree on. So the question becomes is what do we actually do that's constitutional? Because we can keep passing bills, but if they don't hold up in court, then all we're doing it's an exercise in futility.
We got here because of Mike Madigan.
Well, and by the way, what about the Chicago model of which you're a member? I mean, so you have one party that controls everything and has for 100 years. Chicago is a microcosm of Illinois in that it's the worst governed city.
And I've been on the record many times leading up to all these tax increases when I said if we had just done this incrementally over the last 30 years, you wouldn't have to sock it to people at once. But but ignoring that and thinking about your next election rather than making the right decision, to me, is just as irresponsible as kicking the can for 30 years. I've always owned my votes, and I'll continue to own them. People can say that, I voted to raise property taxes. I stand by my decision. It was the right thing to do. It was either that or bankruptcy in the next few years, which, by the way, would have a catastrophic impact on the Illinois economy. I'll never run for my votes, and I've always justified them.
Yes.
By the way, I won in my ward with the largest margin in Chicago by telling people that.
Well, I understand. I mean, the courage to tax, it's the Stockholm syndrome that afflicts this city and this state. I don't really understand it, especially when there's so little residual value that it ultimately generates, as we're describing, with the math. I know to some math is an opinion, just going through the numbers, and it's not because I discount the impact of human beings. It's because I'm impassioned by the impact on human beings, some of whom are not residents of this state anymore because of what Chicago and Illinois have become under the management, the blue model management of Tiny Dancer and Mike Madigan and John Cullerton and, the compliant Chicago City Council, whether you've disagreed with the mayor from time to time or not. It hasn't been particularly pronounced as far as I've seen. But, okay, good luck with the run and good luck taking on the Pritzkers and the Kennedys and all of the men of always in the Democrat primary. Maybe that will be a clarifying moment for you and just in terms of what the Democrat model in Chicago really is. Alderman Ameya Pawar, thanks so much for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.